Hey everyone, so I was recently watching an episode of BuzzFeed Unsolved, which I am a massive fan of, and it was actually about an episode that was sponsored by the newest Nancy Drew series on the CW, which just premiered on October the 9th. Now, it got me thinking because at the end of that episode, and actually this entire season, including all of its promotional materials, Ryan and Shane are dressed as the Hardy Boys. And it got me thinking, Nancy Drew has had several iterations over the past few years. What happened to the Hardy Boys? Now, the Hardy Boys are about brothers Frank and Joe Hardy, who essentially solve mysteries. Now, the original book series came out in the 1920s, but it wasn't until the 1950s that the books really hit their stride after a little bit of a rewrite. Now, the Hardy Boys did get a TV series in the late 60s, as well as recently they have been updated and had their own sort of adaptation in comic form from Dynamite Entertainment. Meanwhile, Nancy Drew, a mystery-solving girl, also debuted in the 1930s, or the early 30s. She would also go through some revisions in her novels in the 50s, and then kind of also join the Hardy Boys in their TV show in the late 60s. Now, the difference with Nancy Drew is that she would also have another TV series in the 1990s. She would also go on to have two feature films, one in 2007 starring Emma Roberts, and another one in 2019 was starring Sophia Lillis of It. And not only that, but she would also get a crack at the comics, also from Dynamic Entertainment, who did the Hardy Boys comic. And now once again, she returns to television with the CW, with Kennedy McMahon taking the title role. So clearly both of these franchises have had different iterations throughout their history, going from novels, TV series, comics, movies, what have you. But Nancy Drew has gotten some special attention, and I don't really know why. The Hardy Boys are pretty interesting, so what makes them so different, and what makes Nancy Drew so much more marketable? Now, before we delve deeper into this video, let me go ahead and put a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't want this to come across as something like me being sexist or anything like that. I think Nancy Drew is actually a really great character. I think she's a great role model for little girls and kids alike. She has a really good influence in wanting to help and sort of be a part of her community and do all these really good things. My point of this video is more asking about, yes, Nancy Drew, that's great, but what happened to Hardy Boys? Because they kind of kick-started the mystery sort of novels for kids. So what makes them so much different from Nancy Drew? I think Nancy Drew is amazing, so I don't want this to come across as me trying to say something negative about her. It's just more of a question as to what happened to this other franchise that very much is along the same lines. And it came out at the same exact time almost, even slightly before. Just why did they disappear? That's the question I'm trying to pose. And if you think about it, both of these series, because they're so similar, they have such similar premises. Young kids solving mysteries, sort of being out in their community, doing the right thing. But this isn't anything that's new. It's been going on for decades, and other franchises have taken that same concept and done it better. I mean, just look at the Scooby-Doo franchise and how well that's done. It's a bunch of teenagers and kids solving mysteries, doing the right thing, and it's been way more massive than both Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys combined. But my point is that the Hardy Boys have not been in the mainstream for quite some time. Yes, they've had different iterations, they've kind of stuck around here and there, but they haven't hit the mainstream like Nancy Drew, Scooby-Doo, or pretty much any other doo-doo franchise that's out there that could be solving mysteries. And this could be sort of pinpointed to a couple of different things. The first is that we've had a lot of iterations of two male figures solving mysteries and crimes and sort of getting a lot of recognition for it. Take, for instance, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson from way back in the time with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Let's bring it flash forward here to the modern era with Batman and Robin. Solving mysteries, two guys solving crime, what have you. You can even pinpoint this to TV with, if you wanted to go a route of like Supernatural, with the Winchesters being able to solve sort of supernatural sort of crimes and mysteries, things like that. Also, two male figures. My point is that men, or a pair of men, group of men, whatever, have been doing this sort of same pattern thing. It's been done over and over again with different iterations, often better than the Hardy Boys being done for decades. And Nancy Drew breaking that mold is a breath of fresh air of having a single girl being able to solve these mysteries and crimes. So that was, again, a breath of fresh air. And the Hardy Boys just kind of had to take a step back because all these other franchises are doing what they did just a lot better. The number two reason why the Hardy Boys could have disappeared and faded a little bit into obscurity could be the fact that based on their history. Now, as I mentioned before, they went through a bit of a rewrite in the 50s, which is where their popularity really picked up. Now, the original 1920s novels were considered a bit racially insensitive. Now, I know the 50s weren't the perfect time for race, but it was starting to build and sort of shift the mindset of the sort of populace. So going back to the 20s, there was a lot of racial insensitivities in that time. So rather than sort of acknowledging that, we kind of want to ignore that, try and push it off to the side, and not focus on characters that have that sort of checkered past, if you will. I mean, let's be honest, in today's day and age, if a studio were to be presented with the Hardy Boys, and they did a quick Wikipedia search, they would find out that a lot of their original content was not something that they want to be putting out in 2019. But there's a lot of other content kind of similar to that have been adapted through to modern times to kind of fix and change that, which is a big area of opportunity for the Hardy Boys if they were to reboot it or bring them back in some facet in the modern era. Now, the third reason why the Hardy Boys might be so difficult to adapt is actually in due part to South Park, where if you recall, there are several episodes in which the pair are sort of depicted as the Hardy Boys, but they're more played as sort of like this homosexual type Beavis and Butthead, where they make a lot of sexual jokes, a lot of sexual innuendo jokes, a little snickering here and there. And that's just something the studio isn't willing to take on, that has something more of a modern adaptation of, that people can still sort of remember, that sort of weird dynamic between the two. And they don't really, although there are a lot more forward-thinking studios and people out there, that they just don't want that sort of image and relatability with that content, and how they were portrayed as having sort of that sexual innuendo jokes and having that sort of homosexual relationship. Even though obviously South Park is very much a parody, I don't think studios are willing to take that leap and believe that the populace would forget the characters like the Hardy Boys on South Park. So is the history of the Hardy Boys and their parody depiction and their checkered past enough for a studio to not want to bring them back? Or is it a matter that in an era and time of a lot of male-dominant sort of superheroes, action heroes, crime-solving characters, that they don't want to bring them back as it might be faded into obscurity, as they may not be as great or memorable as other popular heroes of today, that they just can't quite compare. They're not bringing something special to the table like a Batman, a Superman, a Supernatural, whatever it may be, Sherlock Holmes. There's no real binding point that people can relate to and make them a lot more interesting. Could that be a reason? I would like to think it's the latter, but to be quite honest with you, it wouldn't surprise me if it was the former. But now let me give you a couple of reasons as to why I think we should definitely think about bringing the Hardy Boys back into the modern era. Number one is that they can actually be a great influence to a lot of young kids, introducing them to the sciences, detective work, crime solving, get them interested in areas that we could actually use a lot more workforce in, such as police work, detective work, things like that, and not bring too much focus into characters like superheroes. We can actually have characters that kids, boys, and girls alike can sort of relate with, that they can identify with and say, hey, that's a kid like me. I'm interested in those types of things as well. This could be a possible avenue of me to explore for a career down the line. Reason number two is that it could be a potential franchise, which studios are definitely big fans of in today. If it can make a franchise, why not? But I think my thought process behind this is that it could be a bridge. Think that if the Hardy Boys today were like a modern day sort of BBC Sherlock, but for young kids. Like the kids could be solving their own mysteries. We could have a different focus either per episode, like it's more cinematic like Sherlock, or we could sort of focus on a single sort of crime and solving it per season, but having a lot of twists and turns to it. I think either way would be really interesting, depending on which route you went, even if it was movies or TV. I think they're a little bit more suited for TV, since you can do a little bit more flexible things but not have to go too hardcore, make it really accessible to audiences on a weekly basis rather than go see a movie one time and have to cram all this information about the Hardy Boys and the mystery and all that stuff into about an hour and a half. But I feel like that it could also bridge the gap where having those kids interested in the sciences or detective work, things like that, eventually grow up to watch Sherlock and sort of carry that through where, yes, they are sort of developing and honing their skills and sort of being aware of their surroundings, taking note of detail, just various aspects of it that I think could really work to benefit kids in terms of what they could be as potential career paths. But I'm not trying to get too much on a soapbox about that. And finally, reason number 3 is that I think the Hardy Boys could really take advantage of their checkered past. And by take advantage, I mean by course correcting it and sort of, like I said, you could do a quick Wikipedia search of their history, but you can really bring it again into modern time where you're not really going to focus too much on that stuff, but also sort of be an apology to that where they're going to be a little bit more self-aware about certain issues and be more activists or be more involved in correcting these sort of improper thoughts about maybe racial issues or whatever the case may be. It could definitely help out there and sort of, again, bring sort of a positive spin to it, bring awareness to some pretty controversial topics, but sort of play it in a way that we bring awareness to it, but and respect the past, but also have to acknowledge that we need to grow for the future. Like I said, I might be on a soapbox on this. I don't intend to be. It's actually quite the opposite. I just noticed something in a BuzzFeed Unsolved video, and it got me thinking about the Hardy Boys. Just ended up doing a little bit of research. They were super popular back in the day, so really what happened to them? Why are they not as popular as the Nancy Drew franchise? Even though that franchise is great and it's got its own thing, they just kind of disappeared, faded into obscurity. But there could be several reasons of that, most of which are clearly listed in this video. So, what do you guys think? Do you think the Hardy Boys should make a comeback? Do you think that they should just sort of continue to fade into obscurity? A lot of people forgetting about them. Do you think that they should sort of have their own franchise? Do you think they could spin off of this Nancy Drew franchise that the CW is doing? Do you think that they could join her on the franchise, on their show, very much like Nancy Drew joined them back in the 60s on their own show? There's a lot of different possibilities. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Would you like to see the Hardy Boys come back? How would you like to see it be done? And so on. But those are essentially all my thoughts on the Hardy Boys. I know this was a really random video that kind of came out of nowhere. Just, again, something that I noticed that just got snowballed into a bigger and bigger thing. But other than that, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.